Welcome to this second module of this talk about risk, fundamental ideas and concepts in risk assessment and risk management. And the topic, module 2, is about black swan surprises in risk assessment, risk management, highlighting in particular risk assessment issues. This is the way I define a black swan in a risk assessment context, a surprising extreme event relative to the present knowledge and beliefs. So this means that we always have to take into account a surprise for who and when. We have an event occurring, could be a surprise for some, not for others. Going back to the origin of this metaphor, black swan, in the Western world 300 years ago, we all believed that the swans are white. A Dutch expedition go to Australia and discover that there are black swans. A surprise for us, not for them. Over there, they knew that there were black swans. So this is the key. It's a surprise for us, but not for them. We have had many events in the oil and gas industry where we had the operational team didn't have the knowledge, didn't know that the system was special and needed special treatment, but the knowledge about this was available in the organizations in other units. So the event occurring, surprise for operational team, but not for others. This is an important aspect of black swan. We often refer to this as the concept of unknown knowns, unknown to us, known to others. September 11. Was this a black swan? Yes. A surprise for us, extreme consequences, surprise for us, but not for some. Obviously, some had information. So a surprise for us, a black swan for us, but not for all. And this example is used by Nassim Taleb, the author of the well-known book about black swan that was issued in 2007. He used a slightly different definition of black swan. Nothing in the past can convincingly point to its possibility. I prefer this knowledge, belief reference, but we see we're into the same thing. He used this example with September 11 as an example of a black swan. So this is Fukushima, the accident, the tsunami. Was this a black swan? Yes. I define this as a black swan, but it was a different type than the other. We knew that a tsunami of this size could occur. It had happened before, long time ago. But we say the probability, we assign the probability, we judge the probability so small, we don't believe the event will occur. We do this all the time. I mean, we know that there could happen an undersea volcano in the Atlantic Ocean, but we say the probability is so low, we don't believe it will happen. We don't plan for it because we say the probability is so low, we don't believe it will occur. This is a different type. So we have at least these three categories of black swan events. I've been mentioning B and C. B, the unknown knowns, September 11, and C, the Fukushima. But we also have the extreme case of B, unknown knowns, nobody have the knowledge. Think about the side effects of the swine flu vaccine in 2009. Nobody knew what will happen, really. And now we see the side effects. These are unknown for all of us. An unknown. And in all cases, we are addressing situations where we have extreme consequences. So this is Macondo, a Deepwater Horizon accident, Gulf of Mexico. Was this a black swan? Depends on the perspective. Now, I mean, if you look into the oil and gas industry in a 10-year period, next 10-year period, is it surprising that you have a major accident someplace in the world in this industry? No, I think that's quite likely. So that would not, if it occurs, it's not a black swan in that sense. But if you're on a local level, operating specific installation, yes, all these events that occurred for the Macondo, Deepwater Horizon, is indeed surprising. All these things could happen. If you looked at these things, these events, sort of before the accident, you would say, this cannot happen. It's so unlikely. It's so unlikely. We can ignore it. Or maybe don't at all identify it because it's so extreme. This is typically for disasters. We have a set of combinations of, a combination of events and conditions that together are so surprising and are so extreme surprising. Normally we have barriers stopping these events, so we don't have A, B, C, D, but we have A, B, and it stops. And we don't get a black swan or disaster. But if you have all, you have this combination of so many surprising events. And sort of in advance, you would not see this combination, or if you see it in the risk assessment, you would say it's so unlikely. We can't ignore it. So, going back to these three categories of black swan events. Now, the question is, how should we confront them? What should we do about it? There is a risk related to black swan type of events. We have to acknowledge that there is a risk linked to black swan events. We have seen it. We have had many cases where we have been close also to having extreme consequences that we can think about as close to being a black swan. And then, yes, how to confront the black swan? Well, I would say the key to meeting them is to address the dimension knowledge. They are linked to all these three categories. Think about unknowns. Well, that means we don't have the knowledge. More research into the sort of the effect of this vaccine. Well, then we would knew about the side effects. It's about knowledge. And unknown knowns, the knowledge some have. So it's just to get that knowledge. Not necessarily easy, but it has to do with transfer of knowledge building, and many other aspects. And in the third case, we say that the probability is so small, we will ignore, we don't believe it will happen. So it comes into probabilities, but probabilities are conditional on a certain knowledge. So also there it is about knowledge, because the knowledge could be strong or weak, so that is also relevant to scrutinize, go into the knowledge dimension. And risk assessment is about getting this knowledge. So risk assessments play an important role. But current thinking about current way of dealing with risk assessment is not sufficient. They are highlighting probabilities and expected values, and that is not sufficient for capturing these aspects of knowledge and surprises. We need to have a rethinking of the way we're dealing or using risk assessment. And I'm going now to some issues that are important, trying to improve the way we are thinking about risk in risk assessment context, meeting this challenge of black swan type of risk. And first on my list is these assumptions, or the assumptions. Have we an overview of the assumptions made? That's really basic, but I see so many cases that this is not being done. Then we should say and address, make some sort of assessment, a sort of risk assessment of the deviations from the assumptions. You can call it some assumption deviation risk. Have we done that? And if we find that some assumptions are very critical in this sense, have we done something to try to reduce that risk? That's number one on my list. And second on my list is the strength of knowledge. Is the strength of knowledge that the probabilities are based on assessed? Is this the strength covered or a part of the risk description that you are presenting? And have you tried to strengthen the knowledge where you have quite poor background knowledge? Yes. Okay. And then third on my list, have you made some special efforts to deal with this kind of unknown, known type of risk? Where you have this kind of surprise for us, but not others, because the competence, the knowledge is there someplace, but you don't have it. Have you made some special efforts in the way you're dealing with risk, your risk assessment? Have you made perhaps some quality review, some additional external review, study of your judgments or risk assessment to deal with this kind of risk in case of critical operations, for example? That's the third one. And the next one, have you also looked into the judgments that were made when you said that the probability, the experts, the analysts said that this probability is just nothing, you can ignore them? Have some really looked into that? Could they be based on some sort of poor judgments, lack of knowledge? Are you scrutinizing the judgment that have been made when you ignore certain events? And finally on my list, have you some structures to deal with what is between the analysis and the decision? Because you cannot just have I cannot justify to have a mechanical procedures going from the analysis, prescribing what to do, give a decision. There is something between taking into account the limitations, the additional uncertainties that are there, and that is really a management issue. You can call it a management review and judgment, whatever. The point is that you have some sort of arrangement that can really reflect on what are the limitations of the analysis, what is the context, and make decisions that are taking these things into account. That is challenging, because so often I see that The analysis is just being used directly into decision making, and that is really sometimes a number game. Arbitrary choices have been made because the numbers are really based on the assumptions, and different assumptions will give different numbers. So this is really dangerous. Okay, so we go to module number 3.